As we get to this point in the calendar, as we wind down on free agency and the draft, just obviously this is a place to stop and assess where you are. And first and foremost, I'm going to start and thank with gratitude for all the people who put a lot into this effort. So I have my executive team: Rob Brzezinski, Ryan Grigson, Demetrius Washington, Ryan Munnin, Jamal Stevenson, Sam DeLuca. They put countless hours into this, and just want to make sure I speak about them in this stage. We have, our college group led by Mike Charlton, our pro group, our football admin group, our football quantitative methods group, our football information systems group, our performance group led by Tyler Williams, and then obviously Coach O'Connell and his staff. We talk about a collaboration a lot in this building, but for that to be a real thing, a lot of people have to put their time and effort into the offseason, and so I want to make sure I started by thanking them. We've gotten to a place where we brought back some players that were really important to our culture and our success over these past couple of years, and we're excited about that. But we also added some new ones, some ones that we're excited to add to that success in the same vein, and also build and add to our culture. As we get to this point, obviously we got final draft meetings, really finalizing the board, going through different scenarios and different things like that. Really excited to get to that point. The draft is coming, and we've got a great plan, and we feel great about where we are. Players will be back in the building soon, which is always exciting to have them here. Just always being around the people, being the best version of themselves, professionals, doing things at a high level. It's always great being around them. So excited to see them back. That'll take questions.
Kwesi, when it comes to just the journey to meet all the quarterbacks this year, I guess what are you looking to take away from those meetings? What's the biggest thing that you can learn with a guy when you have one-on-one time with him?
Yeah, I think, before I got here, a lot of the research, I used to do the research on the interview and how kind of, in some sense, ineffective the classical interviewing is. We used to, go to consulting interview and they ask you brain teasers and different things like that. Ultimately we're all trying to get at some answer, some way of figuring out how good this person's going to be in the future at their job. And what you find out is that trying to do as best as you can is simulating what their job is going to be in an interview setting is the best thing you can do. Now, what does that mean in an NFL standpoint? We can't simulate a pocket and different things like that, but we can simulate what it is like to be in a classroom environment. We can simulate what it's like to maybe give a coaching point and see how they respond to it and different things like that. So we're looking for the nuance of that dynamic, knowing that we're going to lean on the film and hundreds of snaps that we've watched on the rest of it. So that's what we try and gain from those interactions, and it's great to see people one after the other to compare, just to see what they're like. And I think the great thing about our building is we have an appreciation for players and people, that they get to different answers. They don't get to the same answer the same way. And so, one person might be a little bit more advanced, maybe because they came from a pro system, but you look at the underlying processor underneath and see how they learn, how they respond, how they get to answers. That's a really cool thing to see up close as well.
Kwesi, with that process, especially with the quarterbacks, how much of that for you guys came from your background and how much came from Kevin's as a quarterback and the guy that got guys ready for the combine?
A lot of it came from Kevin. I think a lot of people who were involved in that process would tell you this was something new to all of them, and I would add myself in that regard. Since we got here, Kevin's really been adamant about, when you select a quarterback, it's a marriage. It's that serious, and that level of commitment and work that should go into it. And so some of my thoughts that obviously the things I've talked about with interviewing and different things like that, and maybe how we measure and process things, those are kind of some of my inputs. But Kevin's been really a big driver of this process, and having completed it, I completely see why, and it's been a great value.
With as much uncertainty as there is in the process, and how do you balance knowing that uncertainty exists with the magnitude of a decision and how much it means?
I think just because something's risky doesn't mean you have to stay away from it. It is something that is hard to grasp, but if you grasp it, you know what the rewards are, right? And that's something you have to weigh and measure. You can't look at these decisions in a vacuum. You look at the whole portfolio of decisions that go around it, the things you have to do. You can look at countless examples of other teams who have made decisions, but maybe the decision you thought was going to be the decision, it was the different decision that ended up being right, and the outcomes were good. But look, I think the last couple of years, I think obviously it's out there, the results of the quarterbacks that were drafted and different things like that. I think we look at those things and we obviously honor them and respect them, but we also look at environment. And are we setting the person up to succeed? So when we talk about these players, it's not just how good are they, it's, well, how do we get the best version of themselves if they come to the Minnesota Vikings? And we set up plans before they walk in the building. I think our odds will be better than the margins. How good are those odds? Obviously it's still a pretty risky thing, but just because something's risky doesn't mean you're scared from it. You're scared of it. You just have to believe in. It's uncertain, right? It's uncertain, and we got to take our swing. But that doesn't give us any pause, I would say.
Kwesi, I think everyone publicly at least has you locked in of trading up to get a quarterback, and maybe around the league as well. Do you embrace that? Do you even spend time trying to push back on whether on the other possibilities that may or may not exist?
Yeah, I think maybe I should in this job be a little bit more aware of what's being said. When I go on my ESPN app to check how the Wolves are doing, that's probably the only time I'll see stuff. But the way we looked at that purely was, we looked at a lot of different situations, and we said, in this situation, what is the best? Where can we be best suited to capitalize on the situation as the Vikings? Look at this situation, and across all four, we thought that this move set us in the right spot, right? So we looked at it as not just, hey, this is a more attractive asset if we went up, but it's also an insurance product, right, on different outcomes. Now, do you always use insurance? No. You could go your whole life and never get in a car accident. But if you did, you'd be really glad you had insurance. So we want to make sure that we set ourselves up for potential better look if a team picks up the phone, because they don't have to pick up the phone. But we also want to set ourselves up for being in a really good situation if they don't. We pick great players, because again, I know we talk about quarterback a lot, and it is the most important position in our sport, but it's the most important position in a team sport. It's not just getting the quarterback right, it's getting the quarterback right and the team around it. So we look at this decision. If you look at our offseason, in a sense, it's kind of the go-between quarterback assets and everything else. And I think our draft will follow the same suit. I don't think you want to necessarily go take these huge swings and not be able to build a team around them, and you'll be in a different, but still not in the place you want to be. So I think that's kind of how we've looked at that decision. And so, I don't know if that's how in-depth all the articles or stuff that people are writing are, but that's kind of how we viewed it.
How did that trade with the Texans come together? Did you guys seek that out, or did they call you, or how did that come up?
We have a lot of just ideas. We throw a lot of stuff at the wall here, and obviously over the last 2 years, I'm probably one of the GMs who's always open to picking up the phone and throwing stuff against the wall, and almost none of it comes to the light of day, and almost none of it gets past the 5-minute phone call. So I built up some relationships with some people who like throwing ideas around with me. Those relationships result in deals sometimes, and obviously I have a ton of respect for Nick, and I obviously knew that there was probably something on the other end that they were going to be doing. I didn't know what. He probably wasn't going to tell me, but we considered it once it came, and we, again, like I said, we went over our scenarios and thought this was a really good way to position ourselves, and we still feel that way.
When did that conversation start?
I wish I don't remember the exact day we first talked about it, but obviously once it did, you go and go meet with Kev and Rob, and we talk about it, obviously clue in ownership, and then talk to my executive staff and just kind of, hey, this is what I'm thinking. You go to the Excel sheet a little bit, you kind of see different things, and you go from there.
Is there a scenario where, like a realistic scenario that you've planned out where you don't draft a quarterback?
I mean, you have to be ready for everything. I don't know that. I think it's a very deep class. But I do think you have to be ready for every scenario. If there's elite players at premium positions on the board, I don't think you're supposed to reach or force or anything like that. That's just not what I believe. All the while understanding that is the most important position in the sport. So it's calculating both those things at the same time.
As you guys look at the quarterbacks and who's going to be available, is there a world in which you think you could get the guy you want without trading up?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. That's the hardest part. You're in it's a blind auction, right, in a sense, and you don't know when the next person's going to raise their hand and call a name. And so you really just got to be strategic about how you position yourself. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, am I going to regret not doing this trade? If that player gets picked, this spot, whatever this spot is, and I was willing to give up this, can I sleep at night? That's how we got to look at the board in every place, and then we'll come up with our evaluations for every player in that way, and we'll make our calls and we'll go from there. And if ultimately if the league is willing to do something that we are not willing to do, we can't necessarily let that dictate our actions.
I'll ask you about that. How do you account for irrational decisions elsewhere?
You have to build in some rationality just because the position and the need. So I will say that I'm not one of those people that, I don't think you're supposed to say that everything's going to be just like when I tell our players when we do deals. There's an uncomfortable middle. I think this is one of those uncomfortable middle exercises. Maybe it's right of the uncomfortable middle, maybe to the left. But so I don't think you're supposed to sit there and say that it's going to be like they're going to give Kwesi some great deal because we like him. But I do think you're supposed to price in, a little bit of irrationality, but then really it's always about walkaway prices. And walkaway prices to me are meaningful because it's another action. Your leverage in a negotiation is your willingness to do something else. So I got to say, I will not do this because I would rather do these 3 other things and make our team better. It's got to mean something. That's how we view this exercise. And so if other teams are willing to do that in a different way that doesn't align with how we think, then we won't do it.
Kwesi, with the quarterback, how do you determine the walkaway price? Because it could be on one hand that you have to spend a lot to trade up.
Yep.
But on the other hand, if you get the guy, then nobody's going to.
And that's the hardest part, right? It's man, if you get the guy right and he's your answer for 10 years and there's no price you probably wouldn't have paid, right? Looking back, and to Ben's question earlier, Alex's questions earlier, you got to go back and, look at the odds of that even happening, and that's the counterplay. Believe me, every GM's got to get up here and talk, and they would probably all tell you the same thing. I don't know that I have some special answer that I can tell you, what the odds are and different things, but that's the hardest part of it. But I do think again, you're always trying to answer the question. Most important position in a team sport. How do you put this most important piece, but also still give yourself the ability to win? Because you can have this great quarterback, and then there's nothing around him, and then you're not really in a great place there either.
When it comes to having your answer for the next 10 years and over time, how that's gone for different teams, nobody can predict the future, but what are the sort of factors that in your mind are those boxes that have to be checked no matter what?
Yeah, I do think at some level, you can call it processing, you can call it playing on schedule, you can call it rhythm time, all these different words that come, but I think there is a play that is called, and that there's a play that should be available to the top half of the league, starting quarterbacks. They got to be able to make it at that clip. I do think there is an accuracy element to that. I do think as the league is gone higher and you get to a place where, you're using assets on the quarterback and maybe you have to pay people in other places that you might have to overcome some stuff, whether that be a dirty pocket or different things like that. And I do think a quarterback has to be able to overcome in that sense. And then lastly, obviously, I think the learning and the intangible aspect of it is crucial. And I don't think everybody's learning style. One of the great things we probably learned from our meetings is we saw a lot of great leaders, and none of them were the same. And that's okay. You can be the quiet leader, you can be the fiery leader, you can be the lead by example guy. It doesn't matter, but I do think there's an intangible sense that's needed. Your culture is your great cultures are typically set by the players, and having your best player, your most important player, be the hardest working guy and different things like that. That matters a lot. So I think how you combine them. I think so. All those things I said are probably things that most people would say, but I think how we go about measuring those things, how we go about talking about things are unique to this building. We're going to give ourselves a great shot at it. We've put a lot into this over the last couple of years. This isn't a 1-year thing or a 3-month thing. This is something Kevin and I really set in motion when we first got here. We've put a lot into it, and we'll see what happens on draft day.
Do you think, you mentioned the environment that player walks into, but do you feel like that can be a causal thing to a guy being
Completely. I do. I think, it's not even just the environment they put in, it's just the ability to grow, not having to have everything on their shoulders right away. You can go back historically, a lot of good quarterbacks typically maybe go later in the draft because they go to better teams, better defenses, better running games, better things around them so that they're not asked to win the game on third down as a rookie, which is very hard in this league. But you maybe come in and you come in and you play in maybe in a run-favored offense and you can throw the ball in favorable situations, different things like that. I think that does matter. So that's the interesting part. When you go back and look at some of these historical things and everybody talks about the low hit rates, is that because the player wasn't good or because the situation wasn't great? and I'm not saying I know the answer to that, but that's something we stress and we argue, we go back and forth and we talk about, and it's true. It really is. A lot of these guys have to overcome circumstance, right? And some guys are good enough too, and that's obviously you want to get the guy that's good enough too. But I do think that there is some situation, the things that are causal situationally. It's a great question. And that's why we talk so much about putting them in the right environment, and what do we have around them? Do you have good pass protection schematically? Are you a progression pass? All these different things that Kevin has really brought in or set up to give a quarterback a chance to play. As you saw last year, we had a guy come in and play after a week and different things like that. Like the environment does matter for these guys completely.
Two more for Kwesi.
You mentioned picking a quarterback's a marriage and falling in love and finding a guy. Can there be more than one of those guys?
I believe. I agree, and I know. I hope my wife doesn't take that as anything negative.
Would be happy.
I do, yes, and we've kind of felt that way for a long time. Just partly because I think there is, again, when you go back to the team element in value, I think there's multiple guys that we are in love with just on an outright basis, but there's also other guys that we're in love with, given what. If we get them at a certain value, what they'd also be able to come with, right? So as I talked about earlier, skill set wise, if you're talking about ability to overcome context, well, if the guy's got less ability, but we have assets to go get somebody who was not going to put him in that situation, those things add up too. So it's really those things. And I want to say that I think that's a great question. I love how, Kevin and a lot of people involved in this decision, a lot of times evaluators can be a little one-track mind. This is the guy and nobody else. That's not how it's been. We've really come to appreciate how guys get to their answer a different way, and I think that's going to serve us well.
Kwesi, how many of those, you say that it is a deep field, and kind of piggybacking off of that, how many of those guys are there in this, people are saying 4 or 5 in the first round. I mean, how many of those guys are guys that you would hitch your career and the franchise to?
Yeah.
In that first round? I mean, are there 5 guys, 4 guys?
I wish I could give you that answer, man. That'd make my phone calls a little tougher. But I appreciate the question, but it's hard speaking right before the draft. I know you might think that's an innocuous question, and I afterwards I'd love to tell you, but it's just something that'll makes your phone calls a little bit harder if teams knowing how many exactly I think that would kind of change their approach to me.
And as far as the deep depth of the class, we all look at the first round, second round, maybe throughout the draft, are there guys that, not Brock Purdy's, but someone that,
every level. I mean, we've again, I wasn't kidding. This is a 2-year process, so we've tried to identify guys at every level, every part of the draft that we think can be different things, and we kind of go from there. That really is. But it's been a thorough process. We get a lot of opportunities now with the Senior Bowl and different ways. We've been around a lot of these guys. We've seen them throw. We've known about them for years. We've gotten their character. So it's not just the names that everybody's thinking of. It's a lot. It's everybody. It's the reclamation market, we call it. It's an all-encompassing approach to the position, and all those players are involved.